Welcome to episode 1 of Everything Delivery. In this podcast, we will discuss anything and everything that helps deliver value to clients while maintaining a healthy and happy organisation. This episode of Everything Delivery is sponsored by Nearform. Nearform has over 10 years' experience in remote delivery, empowering clients to succeed in a digital world through application modernisation, data, design, DevOps, and product. You can find out more at nearform.com. My name's Dan Close, and I'm here with my co-host, Luca Lanziani.
Hey everyone. Hey there. So, what are we going to talk about today?
Right. So, I believe the first, or episode 0, right, as true programmers, we promised that we would talk about observability. So, let's do that. And there's another reason for doing this, right, is that you have a background in observability, right? A very academic start, at least.
Yeah, something like that, right? I don't know if I said that in the previous episode, but I started my career in automation engineering in the university. And at the time, it was probably 15 years ago, something like that, my control theory professor introduced me to observability. Now, imagine my surprise when I've seen the term emerge again in our industry in the past few years. And also, my cousin is now teaching that same class at the same exact university where I studied it. So let's introduce my cousin, and sorry for you that you're watching or listening. This is something that we recorded some days ago, so we're going to look different and we're going to sound different, but we're going to have Andrea explain to us what observability is in academia. So, okay, Andrea, welcome on board, and tell me, what is observability in academia? What is the definition?
Well, to understand the concept of observability, we should give first the definition of dynamical system. Everything that moves around us is dynamical. Dynamics means that there is a pattern or change in the phenomena that we are observing. And a dynamical system is usually represented by resorting to differential equations. And a very convenient form is the so-called state form, in which we have a state vector, an input vector, and an output vector. The state vector provides us with a full description of the system. The input vector describes the external driving terms acting on the system, and the output is what we can see. For instance, we can measure. To make things a little bit more practical, think about a body that is moving in space. We could consider as a state is position and velocity, as an input, a force acting on it, as an output, whatever we can measure, for instance, the GPS position. In this case, observability is the property to determine which was the initial state of the system by only looking at its output.
Okay, that's interesting. I think we can apply some of this definition in software as well, because that's apparently what the industry is doing. We're taking what has happened in automation engineering, in control theory, and try to apply this to our system, that is software. And it's software plus infrastructure plus other things. Thanks a lot, Andrea, for the definition. I think we can take it from here and try to see what observability is in our field.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that was interesting, but we say that is in the academia. So let's look at what observability is in software. And I'm going to leave you, Dan, explain it.
Yeah, I get to read a definition, right? So as we always do in the tech spheres, we just stand on the shoulder of giants. So as you've already mentioned, right, academia is a great place for fundamental research to be done. And so let's start with a definition from IBM, because nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM, right? So IBM have defined observability as the extent to which you can understand the internal state or condition of a complex system based only on knowledge of its external outputs. The more observable a system, the more quickly and accurately you can navigate from an identified performance problem to its root cause without additional testing or coding, which is magical, right? That's absolutely great, makes a lot of sense, and it aligns quite nicely with what your cousin said. But what we haven't done, and the point of this podcast, is what is the value in doing this for your customers? So there are a few areas that we'll get into. So you're going to guess where I'm going to go straight away is going to be the data centricity part, right? So with anything like this, being able to make an informed decision is critical. So observability allows you to do that. It allows you to become a data-driven business. You need to be able to take a look at what's going on around you, measure it, and understand both the good and the bad. So why is this thing happening at this particular point in time? Once you're able to do that reliably, right, so you have these kind of patterns and a repeatable process for doing so, you want to then leverage that to know in advance what changes you're going to have to make under a certain set of specific conditions, right? So if you're in a particular business domain, right? So if you're onboarding a large client, you want to understand what might happen to your system if this client comes on board and suddenly drops, several thousand tickets into your system. If you're launching a video game, you want to understand what's gonna happen when you've got X many more new players appearing on your online platform. Is it going to degrade the entire system, or things going to continue working seamlessly? And then, of course, something that's probably more relatable to the general population is like, imagine you're Amazon. Black Friday is coming up. You're going to want to understand what on earth is my system going to do on or over that period of time, right? You don't want to be reactive to that. You want to be proactive. So being proactive is a great thing for observability. That's one thing. So what about you? What would you chip in on observability?
Well, on my side, the second point that I think is very important is the real value for observability is enhanced customer experience, right? You can gain understanding of your system and having enough information, and I know Dan that information is data, and with that you can actually improve greatly the customer experience. And there are three things that I can probably mention in this area, right? The first thing is preemptive problems. By looking at the trends, you can actually catch problems before they happen. If you see something in the system that is growing and growing and growing, eventually that probably is going to break, right? One classic example is memory leak. When memory is leaking and you see that the system is taking more and more memory, eventually that limit is going to be hit, you're going to have a crash. Another perfect example are queues. And even in the queue, right? If you start queuing a lot of messages, maybe the system is not going to crash, but definitely is going to probably degrade. The experience is going to degrade, right? So if you see that happening, you can preempt a problem and then you can react accordingly. That is the second point, right, of the enhanced customer experience is response to problem promptly. You see a problem, you know that the problem is there. Maybe you're too late because you couldn't preempt that, but now you want to solve it quickly. So the more you understand your system, the more you are able to look at all the system, the more you quickly can identify where the problem is and address it with precision, right? You don't have to spend time wandering around and trying different things. You know exactly where to go and what to do. And then there's the third thing, right? Optimize from baseline. Once you understand your system and you understand how the system wants to behave, you can apply corrective actions to improve stability, performance, and probably the one that is most important, the ease of use. Not just for your customers, right? But also for your internal teams. Because again, in our slogan, or at least the second part of it, we say, while keeping a healthy and happy organization. So let's not forget about our internal users. Simply put, you cannot improve what you don't measure.
So there's one final part, which we actually wrote an article about not too long ago, which you can find on LinkedIn if you so desire. And it's about FinOps, right? So, well, specifically about optimizing value and optimizing costs. So a lot of people like to think of FinOps as a way of cutting costs, but it's actually a great way of optimizing value for your end users. So if you're able to collect the right kind of metrics, the right kind of data as part of your observability platform, it will push you in the right kind of direction for properly setting up your FinOps strategy. So save money, deliver more value faster, right? And I think that's where I'd probably leave it for the moment. Overall, observability gives your customer value by providing systems performance, enhancing their experience, and generally improving system reliability, or giving you the chance to improve systems reliability. It's all data, really.
Let me. I knew you were going back to data, so let me be a little bit controversial now. Let me trigger you a little bit. In one of my recent blog posts, since you mentioned blog posts, I wrote about dashboards, right? And the different type of dashboard that you can use. And you know that to build dashboards, you need data. And what I wrote is, at the end of the blog post, in short, get all the data, hold into it, but know how to use it. And I know that you don't agree with it, at least the part of get all the data. And obviously, let me clarify, it's an oversimplification. So let's talk about collecting data and everything, right? What is important about collecting data when talking about observability? Because it looks like to me that the first thing we want to solve in tech is actually collecting data. I don't think we are fully there yet. And given the definition of observability, without knowing the outputs, there is no way to achieve observability. So can you expand on data a little bit and what type of data we need to collect then?
Yeah, sure. I will take issue first with the collect all of the data, right? I miss the obvious thing to do. I think it's not strictly wrong to go out and collect all of the data. I think the problem that most people have is it's the default response. So rather than think too hard about what they're going to collect, they just go out and collect and then hope to retrofit some questions to that. If you're doing observability, or if you're doing anything with data, I think you need to start with the kind of questions you might want to ask. With that said, I think there are kind of 5 key areas that you'd want to consider in the observability space. So the first is the data types. So what are you actually going to go collect to do observability properly? And there are 3 parts to this, right? So the first is metrics. So these are kind of numerical values that you know and love that can be aggregated and analyzed. Then you've got the logs, what happens in a system when an event is received, or what isn't an event on a system. That's commonly addressed as a log message. And then thirdly are traces. So traces, to your point about these being problematic large distributed systems, is that you need a way of understanding the context from end to end. If you lack context, you fall down a hole, you're not going to be able to adequately solve the problem that you have. And that brings us on to point 2, so data granularity. So the level of detail that you collect data at, it needs to be fine-grained enough to get you to deep insights, but not so deep that, again, you're ending up in a big data problem. So this means collecting data at kind of like high enough resolution with the appropriate context and tags to enable you to address that kind of precise surgical analysis and correlation, right, that you talked about previously. Then data scope, third part. We want to ensure that the data collected covers all of the critical components, all of the dependencies, the interactions within the system. Again, not having gaps end to end. If you do, your observability platform isn't fit for purpose. And consistency, right? Arguably key to all of this is you need to have a standard way of collecting data, standard formats, names, schemas, all of this kind of basic stuff that's often overlooked, but ultimately will define whether or not any kind of data strategy you have is successful. If you have bad data, you're going to have a bad result. And then fifth and finally is data governance, that we can kind of split into 3 parts, I suppose. Retention, as you mentioned with GDPR, right, is how long and where should I keep this data? How long is it going to be archived for? How do I address any kind of regulatory compliance? If I'm storing a large amount of data, if my systems, does require specifically fine-grained data, how much does it cost to store this data, and how much does it cost to use the data? How much do we keep in order to be able to do things like trend analysis or anomaly detection or any of the kind of funky stuff that people talk about when they talk about incident investigations? And then the thing that nobody likes to talk about really is the security and privacy policies, right? So how do we encrypt data? What needs to be encrypted? How do we access it? How do we make sure that we comply with the right kind of regulations across wherever we are, be that GDPR, as you point out, or HIPAA or whatever else? I think those are the kind of 5 key areas that I focus on, obviously nicely subsetted so I can get as many points in as I possibly can. And so that's the data side of things, right? But that's by no means the entire picture, right? You actually need something underpinning all of this to actually do the observability. So I'm guessing this is where you're going to chip in, right?
Oh, there must be something related to DevOps, no? Otherwise, what am I doing here? So, but it's interesting that you mentioned GDPR. I didn't mention GDPR before you said I mentioned it, but that proves that you read my blog post, because in my blog post, what I say it is actually hold into it if you can. Kafka GDPR, right? Or GDPR or many others. And because GDPR itself says that you can retain the data as long as you need them and no more than that time, right? And maybe we can do a full episode on policy. What do you think? Would that work?
I mean, if you want to be brave, yeah, we can do it. But I think we probably need to get somebody in as an expert to take the pressure off there.
But there is
don't want to get anyone in trouble with the law.
There is a lot to talk in there. Yeah, I agree. Though we should probably bring someone on board. But let me think about DevOps in terms of observability. Okay, so the first thing that it comes to mind to me is the way you use the data to react, right? I said before that you have to react promptly, and we all know who's going to react to those anomalies, right? It's probably not going to be a data engineer, will it?
I mean, I suspect not, right? I mean, it's going to be your friendly neighborhood SRE.
So real-time analysis is the first thing that comes to mind. It's all good to get the data. It's all good to have the consistent data, the right scope, as you say, right, the data governance and so on. But you want to use the data. So eventually you're going to have to do real-time analysis and see how the system behaves and react to anomalies. And this brings me to tooling, right? You need to choose the appropriate tooling to do the data collection, yes, but also storage, analysis, and visualization, right? Taking into account things like, as you say, scalability, cost, ease of use, integration to existing systems, and of course, there are a plethora of tools that is already out there that you can use, but as I said, existing systems, there are also systems that you cannot change because maybe your organization is already changing those, has already picked those, right? And so we as DevOps, we're going to help you configure the systems that get the best out of them, right? And be able to leverage all their functionalities. And that's also how we deliver value, right? We help you get the best of your systems. And one of the things that I say is visualization, right? Tools that visualize your data. Again, probably in here, we're gonna need the data experts, right, to tell us what are the data that we want to visualize, but how we visualize them, building the dashboards, consume them, and read them, right, the frequency and so on is something that we can do. And that's what, again, exactly what I'm saying when I say configure them correctly, right? If you have the right dashboards, it makes all the difference. I shared yesterday a clip from a video, right, that is completely unrelated to software. They're actually modeling the way they build concrete, and their dashboards was very simple. And there was a perfect example there. A bar was moving, and someone asked, "Is that the right value?" And the answer was like, "If you see the bar that is green, it is. If it turns red, it's not." It doesn't need interpretation, right? You can just look at the color. You don't have to be an expert on the field.
Yeah. It's about telling a story, right? It's key is being able to tell that story.
Obviously, as you say, there is the whole SRE discussion to have, right? But again, we can park that now. Probably I can say stay tuned for another episode, or is that too much?
I think that's fair, but we are racking up a huge debt in the number of episodes and blog posts that we owe people. So yeah, let's keep adding to that list.
That's fair.
So pressure.
So we have now a brief introduction to observability. Can we actually look at a practical way to apply the things that we just described, right? Is there anything else? Is there anything that can help us do that?
Yeah, cool. So let's start at the fundamentals, right? So we previously mentioned that data types were kind of core to this. So they're core, they form the foundation of everything you're going to build on later. So as you move through your observability maturity. So we like open source tools. We like them for both work and for fun times, right? Just so happens there's a suite of standards and tools that we can leverage in this space, and it's called OpenTelemetry. So OpenTelemetry is part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF, and it's a way to instrument, generate, collect, and export telemetry data. So that is your metrics, your logs, and your traces, with the goal to help you analyze your software's performance and behavior, right? So OpenTelemetry on its website, which you can find posted, the link to it posted in the show notes, describes itself as a high-quality, ubiquitous, and portable telemetry system to enable effective observability. Bit of a mouthful, right? But it does these three things well, and it addresses the points we raised. So things like consistency, how you go about doing this thing once and then leveraging the pattern again and again and again. The other thing that it talks about, and this is something that's often overlooked, and this applies to both metrics, well, to all three, metrics, logs, and traces, is metadata. So collecting data about the data, as I say, the stuff that's often overlooked, like timestamps and things like this. That is immensely useful when it comes to when things are on fire. You don't want to have to think about what's broken. The metadata often can be helpful with that. So that's a very high level look. Now, I know you've got exposure to this and you've done a bunch of work in and with OpenTelemetry. So do you want to jump into a bit more about the kind of details of what it provides?
Oh, yeah. So I think the first thing that we want to mention is probably standardization, right? You're going to have surely some opinionated format. That's what OpenTelemetry gives you, right? An opinionated way to do things. But also you don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time. So, I mean, that's the good part. Be opinionated is not a bad thing per se. Especially, I mean, if there is a consensus across the most experienced people in the observability space, they're probably going to come up with a format that is overall better than what me and you can come up with, right?
Almost definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So and also by be opinionated and by supporting most of the languages, we can solve the data consistency problems that you mentioned above. Now, it doesn't matter if you're logging from Python, if you're logging from Java, or if you're logging from JavaScript, or if you're logging for whatever, right? Most of the languages that OpenTelemetry supports, the format is going to be the same. Maybe not the field of the logs, right? But at least the metadata are going to be the same. But now there is one caveat there, right? Because we mentioned that OpenTelemetry supports tracing, metrics, and logging. It would be nice if that was the same across the three areas. The support was the same across the three areas. Unfortunately, if you've been working with OpenTelemetry, you know that traces are the most supported one. So OpenTelemetry is focused on tracing, especially distributed tracing, because that's what really matters. Metrics is the second, right, most supported feature, and logging is lacking a little bit behind. They're working on that, but again, it's not there yet. So probably once you implement OpenTelemetry, the first thing that you want to try to implement is tracing. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why tracing, why they start, why, or at least why we think they started from tracing. The very nice thing is that with the standardization, we also solve the tooling problems that we mentioned above, right? There is a plethora of tooling, as I said, and it's already a struggle to pick the one that you prefer. And sometimes you understand that the tool that you picked is not the right one for you, so you have to change the tooling. Now imagine having to re-instrument all your software, right? Re-instrument all your infrastructure. So the nice thing about this is that with OpenTelemetry, you can actually replace most of the monitoring tools and most of the observability tools. Sorry, let's be a little bit more correct there. And in theory, the tools are gonna ingest the same format. Why I say in theory? Because not all the tools maybe support OpenTelemetry, but many tools, many observability tools are actually contributing to OpenTelemetry, not just supporting. So there is a big push from the overall industry, right? And no one wants to lose that opportunity.
You don't want to be left behind, right? And the same is true in the data space. And it's a great thing that we've got a community coming together around a common framework as opposed to going in, myriad different directions, which is really helpful, right?
So you better check out OpenTelemetry if you don't know it already. Again, the link is in the show notes, so go ahead and check it out. So, okay, we looked up the benefit of observability. Do we want to look at some of the pitfalls of observability, right? So, for instance, we said collect all the data, right? That's, again, I'm going to go back to my controversial thing. But what about when you don't collect all the data, right? What about incomplete coverage? Because that is something that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it frequently does, right? People don't step back to think about what it is they're doing, and they just, I'm going to implement observability. Therefore, I've got this wonderful tool in OpenTelemetry, and I'm just going to plug it in, and away I go. If you don't stop and think about the kind of questions you're going to need to ask about your system, you end up with these gaps. And it doesn't really matter how small those gaps are. If there's something that you can fall down, there are laws, commonly cited Wikipedia laws that you can look up to describe these kind of situations. You can guarantee that one thing that you miss will be the one thing that you have the problem with, right?
So that's interesting, right? But who should decide what to monitor? And maybe we can also go into who should decide not just what in terms of components, but what in terms of the thing to look at, right?
No, I think I know where you're going with this, right? So you want me to say it's all down to the developers, right? And it's all on them, or is it?
No, so, that should be surprised, right? That's not where I'm going with that.
I know. So right, it's down to everyone, right? So there are a bunch of different areas that you need to look at. It's not just about the technology space. We've already we've mentioned that the point of this podcast is to talk about how to help the entire organization, not just one particular tranche, be that business or tech. So when you're doing this kind of thing, you need to work up and down the entire business to understand what it is you as a team need to understand to best be able to serve your customers as you've sent. That could be internal developer teams, like you could be part of a platform team doing something like this, or it could be a final user-facing website, right? You need to, as a group, understand all of the components that could lead to, let's paint a not so happy picture, right? Reputational damage or something like this. That's going to cover the entire gamut of people problems through to tech problems.
That is interesting. What I used to say is that your system is layered, right? There are different layers, and in each one of those layers, there is someone responsible for observability. And if you look at the start of the first layer, let's look at layers from the user perspective back to the database or your backend system, the last step, right? If you look at the users, I've seen companies doing observability with tools like Google Analytics, that we know is not an observability tool per se, or what maybe you usually think as an observability tool, but effectively for business people or marketing people, that is a good tool for them, right? To observe the behavior of users. So probably you can classify that into the observability tool, right? You can see the output, you can see how people behave in your website. And in that case, who are the people that decide what to collect? Those are going to be business people. Those are going to be marketing people, right? And then you can trickle down this thing and look at the front end, maybe the code itself, right? And so you use systems like Sentry, maybe. So again, more on that side there. Then you go to the backend, and then you go to the database, and then you go to the infrastructure. And there are even cross functions that are there, right? You look at FinOps.
How dare you? Everyone should stay in their silo. Everyone stays in their silo.
You look at security. You look at FinOps, right? Those are, again, there must be observability there too. FinOps is all about observability. It's all about data.
Yep.
So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So each one of those actors, those sectors, will have someone responsible for defining which metrics they want to monitor, what they want to collect, and what the amount of coverage they want to have. Now, I say collect, so the second pitfall is overcollection. Both in terms of too much things or too much data point.
You connect too much, right? So, okay, things are on fire, your world's falling down around you, and you need to know what's going on. You don't want to have to spend a vast amount of time finding that needle in the haystack. By having the right data in the right places and knowing what it is, where it is, and why, and how to get at it is crucial. If you over collect data, you end up with too much data. Rarely is it done well, and you basically get a nice flat cake that, it's that rainbow cake doesn't exist anymore, right? It's just a mishmash of data. It becomes, a data swamp. To your point around collecting all of the things, it's about collecting all of the things that you need, as opposed to just, it's mine, I'll have it, thank you, and I'll deal with it later.
Yeah, I think there's also a temporal point there. So I've seen a blog post, and if I find the blog post again, you will find it in the show notes, right? Where they were discussing how much data you need now, opposite to how much data you will need in 6 months and in 1 year and in 2 years, right? Even going back to your example of Amazon, right? Amazon and Black Friday. If you want to see how your system, or predict the way your system wants to behave during this year, Black Friday, you can look at 1 year back, 2 years back, right? But the data granularity that you need is probably not the same that you need right now, right? So in theory, there is a way to say over collection, and over collection you can see it as collecting too many data points now, but even keeping too many data points around. You may need to over collect right now. Yeah, you may need to over collect right now, or not over collect, but you know what I mean, right? Collect more than what you think is useful, but it doesn't mean that you have to keep all the stuff around. So in this blog post, there is actually a company that was explaining how they collected a sample every, I'm random numbers for now, right? Like let's say every second right now, but then going towards that will clean that up and keep one every minute, right? Or one sample every 5 minutes.
Yep.
Does it make sense?
Absolutely. And this is absolutely the right way to go. And this is where a lot of people do data well, is by taking that data, aggregating it, throwing some away, which is super crucial, and then storing the key fundamental, and you used this word earlier, information as opposed to data.
Okay, so, and then brings us to insufficient data retention, right? In recent years, we have seen a couple of incidents when companies figured out that they had a leak or a problem or an issue, and then that happened in the past. And now you have to find out when that happened. And if you don't have enough data, how do you manage that, right? Where is the right balance on the data retention part?
So fundamentally, it's a hard problem to answer, right? I don't think there's one fixed answer that applies to everyone. Now, in certain cases, you have to deal with certain regulatory compliance, right? So if you're in finance, there's a certain amount of time you have to keep this data. That's assuming that you are leaking things that you perhaps shouldn't be into your observability platform, right? So you shouldn't have the kind of information you'd expect to be covered by GDPR inside your observability platform. But I think, as we both know, we've seen this happen in various places. You need to be able to deal with this kind of stuff. That said, if you are implementing the solution well and properly, and this isn't the case, you just need to keep the kind of information you think will be relevant for certain kind of questions or problems that you want to address, right? So you don't want to be throwing away data that might help you build patterns up around things like predicting your system's behavior over time. So if you want to do the ML side of observability, which the kind of more advanced groups do, you need to have that data that allows you to build those kind of inputs to those systems, which does require some amount of data, right?
That is interesting. That is interesting. It actually brings me to another point, right? So you say you wanna look at trends, you want to improve. So you go back and you look back at the data that you had in the past. But there is one thing that always get me, right? Your system is not fixed in time. Your system is gonna evolve. So now, how relevant are old data? Obviously, it depends which data we're looking at, right? But if you look at, again, basic metrics, right? Last year we needed 20 servers to do Black Friday. I think Amazon will be amazed if you only needed 20 servers to do that. But a random number again. This year you may be using different machines, right? With different type of CPUs. So that 20, that data point won't make sense anymore. Does it?
Exactly. No, it doesn't. And this is why it's important that you need to understand. You have to have the consistent data, right? You have to have quality data to be able to understand what it is that you're dealing with. And to the ML side, or let's stick with ML or machine learning. There's this. Everyone used to say, it's like 10 years back or whatever, rubbish in, rubbish out. And this is where things like metadata become super useful. So being able to understand what is going on accurately within your system and making sure you're leveraging that right consistent data, that you're comparing the right thing to the right thing. Otherwise, you end up making dreadfully bad decisions. So open, understandable, discoverable data that is of high quality and consistent is ultimately absolutely key to this. That also then brings me to who can access this kind of data, right? Because if we talked about GDPR, the next sensible step is security. So what do we make of that?
That's okay. Security is another thing that probably requires a full episode. We know that right now the most two overused terminologies, encryption at rest and encryption at transit, right? When talking about data, we also know that there is all the part about governance, who can access data, what type of data, right? How many people are needed to access the data, and all of that nice juicy discussion that we can have. So I don't know. I probably won't start there if you because there is a lot to unpack there. Is there anything specific you want to go with that point?
No, I think to your point is, this is one of the things that people think about too, like overthink at the start, and so they use it to slow themselves down and then don't end up properly implementing observability. Like there's too much focus is put on the risk associated with exposing the right and wrong bits of data. But as you say, it is an immensely loaded conversation. And to our earlier point around GDPR, we are probably not the best place for people to kind of discuss this stuff. So yeah, let's get somebody else on who we can rope in who we can put under pressure to answer legal questions that as anyone's willing to send us on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah. Instead, I would like to move to one point that I think we didn't mention yet, and it's the lack of continuous improvement. We say that
Yeah.
we get the data, we look at the data, we see what's happening, we do, trend analysis, so we look at the past, but we also said systems are going to evolve. So you need to evolve with them, right?
How do you do that?
Oh, that's the interesting part, right? The thing is that the more you look at the data, the more you look at what observability gives you, the more you should be able to understand about your system. The more you look at the data, the more you should understand the gaps that you have. And you should, work on those gaps.
But it's an iterative solution, right? It doesn't come out of the box all done from day one, right?
Not just there, but it's not a one-off, right? You cannot achieve observability in one day, because for most of the things that we covered above, including the incomplete coverage, you can add another component to your system. And so that component needs coverage. So now there are ways to probably simplify this with the proper processes, right? If you put the proper processes in tooling, like if you automate the observability of components, or you enable teams to get observability for free, you can cover that. But there are things that you cannot solve via automation. Let's assume that right now you don't have tracing. You do want to add tracing, and so it requires some effort there. It requires some effort from people inside the organization, both in business and tech and the technology, right? To work together and keep making your system better. Your system is going to change. Your system is going to grow. Your system is going to get more complex. Hopefully not too much, but it's still going to get more complex. And so you want to somehow keep refining your observability. Maybe abstracting dashboard, maybe adding more dashboards, maybe adding dashboards that drive people in the right path and to look at the right data.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, to those points, and I feel moderately bad now, right? Because talking about the gaps in the system, I make it sound like it's really, really easy to do, and it's absolutely not the case. This is, as with anything that we're doing, it's iterative. You take a small step and you build, you rinse and repeat. You're always going to have gaps. No system is going to cover all of the gaps at every particular place. It's about having just enough kind of education to perform. Yeah, if you're a fan of the stereophonics.
Hey, there's another thing that I used to say, right? Everyone wants to have a Ferrari, but you don't need a Ferrari. You probably need a family car at the start.
Yeah.
So let's start building a family car of observability, and then we can work the way up to a Ferrari, assuming that you need a Ferrari in the first place.
Absolutely. Cool. So we've covered off a bunch of pitfalls and how you go about solving for those. So the careful kind of planning, the continuous monitoring and improvement, and the collaboration between teams in design development and operation of the entire system, right, end to end. So is there anything else we want to cover for today, or do we want to call it a day?
I think we covered enough, right? We got the academia definition, we got the values, right? What type of values we provide. We also analyzed one tool that is OpenTelemetry. We went through the pitfall. Probably one thing that we didn't go into the implementation details, right? We didn't look at how we can actually achieve all those things. We talked a lot of theory. Yes, we presented the tool, but nothing too details. So maybe we can take the next episode to do that. What do you think?
I absolutely think that's what we should do. So we've made a lot of promises about what we will potentially cover going forward. But yeah, absolutely. Next time out, let's focus in on a more technical approach to building out how you actually do this for real, as opposed to what you get for doing it.
So we're going to look how we implement tracing, metrics, and logging.
Absolutely. And I think we should do that with OpenTelemetry.
Yeah, and the value you get out of each one of those. Because again, let's remember that this podcast is about value. So before we close this, where can people find the episode 0 of this podcast?
You can find us on our website at everything.delivery. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/@everythingdelivery. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Music alongside any other podcast platforms. You can find us independently on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Discord.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Take care.